think the one thing to think about is all the different types of people who might be coming onto your website. So first of all, there's people in your congregation, and then people who are Christians but not.
Right.
There's also unbelievers who maybe are searching to find something. So there's already 3 types of people who are going to be coming. And then you've got families with little kids, families with teenagers, you've got students, you've got retired people, you've got all sorts of people. So to try and put yourselves in the shoes of all the types of people who you think might be coming or interesting, and make sure that you've got something for all of them, because they all have different needs, they'll all be looking for different information.
That's really helpful.
And Facebook, you just can't do that.
Hello and welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast. My name is Adrian Reynolds. I'm Head of National Ministries here at FIEC, and I'm joined by Joel Murray. Hello, Joel.
Hello, Adrian.
Tell us just, Joel, what do you do at FIEC?
I don't know. I do know. It's I do communications and media, so that's mainly websites, but also a little bit of printed stuff. Thinking about videos, thinking about the podcast, and trying to get the work that we do, trying to get it out to the good people who lead the churches in the FIEC.
Great.
To let them know.
Nice to have you with us. And Phil Topham, our Executive Director, which makes him sound extraordinarily important.
Yeah, not true.
What does that mean, Phil?
What does it mean? It means that I do all the high-level administrative work and look after the governance of the charity. But I think the reason I'm in this podcast is because I used to do Joel's role before moving into this role. So very, very similar background from that sense.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. And we're talking today about church websites, and not the sort of the detail of how you code and all that kind of stuff, but just the top level stuff that we think is really important for churches to grapple with. Websites are important, aren't they, Joel? Can't ignore that in today's world. Why is that?
They're incredibly important. So put yourselves in the shoes of someone who's moved into your area, or someone who has just come to know a bit about Jesus, who lives nearby. How are they going to find a church community to join, to learn from, to share with, to get support from? How are they going to do it? They do it online. They go onto Google, churches near me, and they get a map probably with some little red dots, and they get a list of loads of websites of different churches. And so that's the first port of call, really. Whatever it was in the past, that's what it is today. So
it's quite an interesting exercise, isn't it, to type in the place where you live and churches and see whether your church appears on the front page.
And make sure you turn off private search results, because Google or whoever it might be may well put yours there because you visited your website often.
Okay.
So turn that off, pretend that you're completely anonymous, and then you'll see what happens.
So see where you come in the list. Yeah.
I think that's really important, because in the past, if you moved to a new area, you might take a wander around and look at all the church notice boards and decide which one you thought would be the best fit for you. But that's the modern equivalent now. People Google it, don't they?
That's the notice board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's the equivalent of having your big sign outside the church that people might stop and look at and see all that detailed information. Now they see it all online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember in the past talking to a church about a really old and dishevelled notice board at the end of their kind of driveway, and basically saying, oh, nobody looks at that anymore. But the reality is some people would look at that. And if your website gets as dishevelled as that notice board was, it's just as damaging, I think, in terms of people coming along.
Yeah.
And this is borne out, isn't it, by the reality of life. I mean, all of us are the 3 of us are in 2 different churches, but we've been in other churches. And we know, don't we, that when people turn up, especially Christians who have moved into the area, they say, oh, I found you online, or I listened to a sermon online. That sort of narrative is very common, and you'll have found that, I'm sure listeners have found that in their own churches as well.
Even if it's another way, like a recommendation. So, I'm coming to Market Harbour, go to Christchurch. Well, people are still going to go online and search Christchurch to see what it's all about anyway. So still
see where you are,
important.
what time, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that starts to beg a question, really, which is, what are some of the essential ingredients for a church website? What's some of the information that you want to be conveying there, Phil?
Well, I think you need to be telling people who you are, what you believe, where you meet, why you do what you do, and some of the activities of the church. I think that's probably a bare minimum. Most people going onto your website will want to know when your service is and where you are. Those things are absolutely vital. And if they're difficult to find, that can be extraordinarily aggravating. So you know yourself, if you use a website that's difficult to navigate, that's just frustrating, isn't it? So you really want those key things to be front and center, I would suggest. And people shouldn't necessarily have to dive down into many sub-levels of your website to find that information.
So actually on your front page, your landing page, it's sometimes called, that's where the really essential stuff needs to be, doesn't it, Joel?
Yeah, again, so put yourselves in the shoes. Maybe you're at a fair or something, you're introducing your church to a stranger or someone on the street. What would you say to them to explain to them what your church is? That's what it needs to be on the homepage, because that's very likely where they're going to turn up. up. So straight away they need to know what they want, the kind of lift pitch. So in 20 seconds, could you explain what your church is and what people need to know? Try and get that onto the homepage.
Now, Phil, one of the things you just listed there in your list of stuff that needs to be on a church website was what you believe. I know you feel strongly about that. I do too. There's nothing more frustrating is than visiting a church website and there's nothing about what they believe.
Yeah.
Why is that important?
I just think it's important that people know what they're coming to. I just think that's vital for our mission and ministry. We don't want people to be under any illusions. When they come to the church, they should expect the church to do what it says it's going to do. And a lot of that will be born out of what the church believes. So I think it's important to know what the church believes about God, what the church believes about the Lord Jesus, what the church believes about the Holy Spirit, what the church believes about baptism even, what the church believes about engagement with the community, those kind of things. Because I think if you're going to visit it, you should have an idea of where the church is coming from. And we know what's wonderful about the FIEC is not all churches are the same, but all those core doctrinal truths would be the same. And they're the key things that we need to get onto the kind of what we believe part of our website.
So a little bit about what to expect on a Sunday. That's really helpful, right, Joel?
Yeah, again, if you're a visitor, it's for a Christian, it's quite daunting because it's a new place. For an unbeliever, it's a
multiplied,
massive,
isn't it?
Yeah,
a thousand
massive
times.
step to go forwards. And if you can help them to know what to expect, to know who's going to be there, to what's going to happen when they first arrive, what's going to kind of happen during the service, what's expected of them, like what do you wear, all that kind of stuff. I think that's really important.
I think you put your finger on something there. I think what do you wear is actually really important. I think I mean that. I think how do people dress for church? I think if there's an expectation that you would dress in a certain way, then that needs to be made clear.
Sure.
I think that's helpful.
So websites need to be honest, right, Phil? And I mean, we're just starting to get into the question of things that are unhelpful. Actually, you can on a website portray an unhelpful, unrealistic picture of what church is like, can't you?
So I think one of the dangers when we put websites together is that we rely on stock images. A stock image is basically an image that's available for free or for a small fee from perhaps an online agency, which gives an idea of what something looks like. But the fact that it's a stock image means it's not an image of your church. So, for example, it might be a crowd of people, but actually if it's a crowd of people who've got no engagement with or nothing to do with your church, but you portray this on your church website as being an accurate reflection of the church, that's massively misleading.
So it may be aspirational for you.
Yeah.
It may be a group of 30-year-olds. It may be a group of 100 30-year-olds and from all different backgrounds and all different ethnicities and so on. But if you're a white, middle-aged
congregation,
church, it's not particularly helpful, is it?
It's not honest, and I think it'd be much better to have pictures of your church and the people who attend your church, so that people know what to expect, and I think that's vital.
Is there a challenge with putting pictures of people online now, Joel? What's the info on that?
There can be. I was asked by this question just the other day. Someone wants to take some new photos for their congregation. Said, "What do we need to do?" And it's kind of a bit of a grey area, really. But I think just to be more cautious than you think is probably the safest bet. Yeah. So make sure that you've asked the people. Well, first of all, before you're taking any photos, maybe in the Sunday service or an email, say, "We're going to do this." Just so you're aware. It might mean that some people stay away, but that's fine as long as you can address that. And then on the day when you're taking photos of people, especially close up, or even if they're in the background but very noticeable and identifiable, then to make sure that they know that the photo's been taken and they've kind of written down who they are, they've kind of signed to say, yes, I give consent. And also to give them an opportunity to then later on, maybe they say, actually, no, I don't want my photo to be taken. Maybe leave them with some contact details and information about where it's going to be so they can easily then go and do that. That's that kind of personal privacy is really important in that. But I think most people will be quite happy to, especially if you explain why we're doing it. Yeah. We want to tell the community and tell the people outside the church about who we are. Please, will you help us? Then that's a good way to start, I think.
I mean, there can be some safeguarding implications as well. So if you've got parents with adopted children or foster children, that kind of thing, you've got to be a little bit careful about.
Always ask.
Yeah, absolutely. You must get permission, and you always need permission for pictures of children. You need parental consent or guardian consent. Yeah.
And always ask actually about stuff that you're sourcing from the internet. You've got to be very careful.
Oh, hugely careful. So you can't just pinch things off the internet. You can't just pinch photographs. You can't just pinch things like poems or extracts from particular prose or books. You can get in all sorts of hot water there. And let me say, there is software that basically mines websites, for want of a better phrase, and it will find something if you've used it illegally, and you'll be handed a bill for it. So, for example, if you use an image from, say, Getty Images, you'll often see Getty Images sort of captioned on the BBC website, for example. If you take a Getty image and use it on your church website and you have not paid for that, you will end up paying for it.
Yes, I've had that bill in a different life, which was completely... it was not deliberate. I actually tried to search for copyright-free images and mistakenly used a Getty image, and they sent me a bill for £300, which was...
Yeah, absolutely, and you had to pay it.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't get around it. You can't just refuse to pay it. We'll come on perhaps to some websites you can go to where there are free images available, but it's worth just telling this story as a cautionary tale. In a previous role at another place, there was a church who received a bill for, I think it was £7,500 from the United States because they had used a poem from a US website without permission and quoted it verbatim on their website. They argued it in court and they got the fee reduced slightly, but they still ended up paying several £1,000s to the author of the US poem that they'd used without permission. You've got to be so careful. Don't just assume it'll be all right. And don't also assume that if you're using a Christian poem by a Christian, that all will be well. Yeah. Because in the States, Christianity, bluntly, is big business.
Well, anyway, the worker deserves his wages.
Oh, quite. But we just got to be so careful.
I mean, actually, why not use things from within your church anyway? You want to tell the story of a church, don't you, Joel? You don't want to be telling the story of a church in the States. You want to be telling the story of your church. What's it like here?
Yeah, it's a good argument to say do it yourself. So get your own photos. Maybe there's someone in your congregation who is a keen photographer, who's got a bit of experience. Maybe they work as a photographer. That would be really fantastic. Or maybe it's just a matter of looking at your church budget and saying, we want to reach out. We're going to put some of our budget this year towards getting some decent photos done. Get photos of the Sunday school, of the whatever activities you do in the church, outside the church, inside the church, all that kind of stuff. If there's communion, a photo of communion so people know what that's going to look like, rather than trying to take it from anywhere else. Do it yourself. There's so many benefits towards doing that. It might cost a little bit of money, but I think it's a good investment to do so.
We've actually got in our church, we haven't got a huge number of teenagers, but we've got a couple of teenagers studying art, A-levels, graphics, graphic design, photography. You could use them, couldn't
Fantastic,
you? Could be part of their project for A-levels and stuff like that.
You can get free images there. There are websites that do it.
Yes, there are. Yeah, I
can't remember enough off the top of my head.
Unsplash.com is the best.
There you go.
That's the one.
So unsplash.com is a really good place to go to. You can also go to Flickr.com, FLICKR.com, and in the search criteria at the top, you can search for something called Creative Commons. And if a photo is registered under Creative Commons, it means it can be used commercially without payment. You have to credit the photographer, but you can use it without payment. So actually on our website, we use pictures of Market Harbour, the place where we live. And there's a very good local photographer whose photos are all Creative Commons. We use those. And a really good tip here, actually, that I was given by our digital strategist, Jonathan Bennett, who works for us, was that even when you're using someone else's photos and they've given you permission online to use them, which in this case they had, see if you can get in contact with them and drop them a note. It's just polite. It's a way of engaging. And so actually we use photos by a woman called Holly Victoria Norval, and she actually lives just across the road from one of our elders. And I just put a note through her door and said, love the photos. I love that you've made them free to use. We'll use them on our publicity. Thought you'd like to know. And put a copy of the, we actually produced a little tract. Put a little copy of the tract that we'd produced through her door.
Unsplash is really interesting. There's a lot of Christian content on there, people with Bibles and things like that. I think it's from that American, it's big stuff there. But you do have to be a little bit careful because there's a particular photo of a man holding a Bible out. And he's kind of blurring, the Bible's in focus. And I've seen that on 3 or 4 church websites. They've obviously thought, this is a great photo. It's free on Unsplash. I'll use it on our website. But then you can start, if you use it a lot,
when you start searching for prayer, you find even less good photos to use on Unsplash.
Yeah.
I see the same photos coming around. Phil, you look at a lot of church websites. We get information from a church. One of the very first things we do often is just type it into a browser, have a look at the website. What are the things that make you just go, when you look at a church website landing page?
I think something that looks like it was launched at the beginning of the internet. So there was a time when the internet was new and there was all sorts of creative ways of using kind of images and text and boxes.
Clip art.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. And you just think, gosh, this was something that was put together in the late 90s and it's never really been updated since then. So I think dated websites are something that makes me a little bit cringy.
And dated content, right?
Oh, This is what we did in Easter 2013, and it's still at the top of the website. Well, you're laughing, but we see it, and I think that shows a visitor that you're not taking seriously the stuff that you do because you're not updating it, or it shows that you've become really insular and you're only actually caring about the people who come to you week by week, but you're not really thinking about visitors.
So, I mean, it sounds like, maintaining a website could be a full-time job almost in a church, Joel. Is that really how it has to be?
It's not necessarily a full-time job, but you do need someone who's going to keep an eye on it. So it's definitely something to think about, especially if there's someone who's experienced in your church, you can do so. Or if there isn't, so there are some companies who you can pay a fee to, and they'll kind of help you through. So they'll make it easy for you to kind of keep things up to date if you're not particularly experienced. And if you've got a problem, they'll be on the end of a phone or an email to help you out.
Right.
But it needs to be kept up to date. So I was going to say, if you've got a blog or a news feed, that's really great to show people that you're doing stuff. But if you haven't posted on it for 6 months, just get rid of it, because if you can't do it, be realistic. If you haven't got time to keep something like that up to date, then don't do it.
Well, I think that's really helpful, because you can have a really helpful website that has static information on it, which is unchanging, which is service time and is necessary and needed. And that is more helpful than having, say, a news or a blog feed of something that you never update. So you'd be far better basically having a service time, service location, what to expect, here's what we believe, which is static information, rather than saying at such a point in the year we did X or Y.
That's the equivalent of your old church notice board.
Absolutely. And that's absolutely vital, because if that is good and helpful, that will serve you much better than trying to maintain a kind of a blog or a reporting mechanism or a news feed. And there are lots of great, it sounds onerous, but there are lots of websites you can pay a small fee for, which basically almost upkeep themselves. So tell us about Christchurch Harbour's website.
Well,
what do we do?
Just before I get to ours, I'll tell you a feature we have in ours, which most websites allow you to embed a calendar. And in fact, we have a Google Calendar in the church, which anybody, well, not anybody, because we have restricted access to it, but multiple people can update, which just has the meetings as they appear. And on our events page on our website, it just embeds the Google Calendar in a nice format. It does all the formatting for you. And actually, as events go, they drop off the calendar and the next one is top. So the top of the list is always the next event in the church's diary. So actually, we do nothing apart from update the calendar every now and again. And it always has the next event coming up. So that's a pretty easy way. So we use something called Faith Life, and there are other providers are available. So, I mean, you can spend a lot of money, can't you, on developing a website and designing a website. We use Faith Life, which is basically a front end to help you create a website. And I think we pay $300 a year. It's a US company. We have our own URL, which is our website address. And we've got people who are updating that with absolutely no web experience. They're not coders, they're not experts. All you have to be able to do really is type and click with a mouse. And we keep it quite simple. It has sermons on it, has static information about the church, has a landing page. We have information about the next service on the front page. We have a little evangelistic message at the top of the front page that's updated every half term, something like that. And it's just very simple to use. And there are lots of things like that. You don't need to go out, I don't think, and spend £10,000 on a church website. No. There are companies, and especially I think this is we've benefited from the US market because there's such volume in the States. There are companies out there who are providing low-cost website interfaces effectively to help you build a website with very minimal expertise.
I guess you could use Facebook as well, couldn't you, Joel? Just as,
you could.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't suggest it necessarily.
Why not?
I mean, Facebook is a particular. It's a media, so it's a way to send a message out there, and you do have information there about where you are and all that kind of stuff. But a website gives you so much more opportunity to tell your story, tell what you're about, to enable people to find what they exactly they need. Whereas Facebook really is a feed of messages that go out, and they're timely, but they go out of date. A website it just gives you more opportunity to tell people the stuff that they need to know.
That's interesting. So you would say a website over and above an up-to-date Facebook page?
I would say that, yes.
But it doesn't need to be 20 pages of website, does it?
It could be one. It could be one page. Yeah, I think the main
and better thing, one well done page, presumably,
agreed,
than 20 out of date pages.
Sure, yeah. I think the one thing to think about is all the different types of people who might be coming onto your website. So first of all, there's people in your congregation, and then people who are Christians but not.
Right.
There's also unbelievers who maybe are searching to find something. So there's already 3 types of people who are going to be coming. And then you've got families with little kids, families with teenagers, you've got students, you've got retired people, you've got all sorts of people. So to try and put yourselves in the shoes of all the types of people who you think might be
really
coming or
helpful,
interesting,
yeah.
and make sure that you've got something for all of them, because they all have different needs. They'll all be looking for different information.
That's really helpful.
And with Facebook, you just can't do that.
And you could ask people in the church, couldn't you, Phil? What do you think of our website?
Yeah, absolutely.
Different kinds of people.
Absolutely. And you'll be amazed to hear, first of all, how few of your congregation visit your own website.
Okay, so say a bit more about
Well,
that.
so I just think we have this theory as church leaders that build it and they will come. And actually, if you did a straw poll on a Sunday morning of how many people have used your website during the week, you'll probably find the number is far lower than you would want it to be.
Well, they know where you meet, right?
Well,
They know who the leaders are. They know what you believe.
So at one level, you could ask the question, should they be expected to visit it? Which is a good question to ask. But that comes back to Joel's point about who's the website for. And if you're building something as a resource for your church members to use, then that's a slightly different thing than if you're using it as a tool for people to find you and to know that you're there. So I think, this expectation that everybody will visit your website if you put it together is not necessarily borne out in reality. People are more likely to go for a specific reason. So bluntly, the only reason I go to the Christchurch website is if I need to catch up on a sermon because I was away.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not offended.
No, I think you should be, but it's just to be realistic about it, I think.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I didn't ask you the question I wanted to, which was the same question I asked Phil. You look at a lot of websites. Yeah. What makes you kind of cry out in desperation when you see a church website?
One thing the other day was websites that might have an acronym in it, to not explain what the acronym stands for. That really frustrates me. Or to explain what the church name is or who they really are. If you turn up to a website and the person who's made the website has assumed they know about you, then there's missing information, and you have to really dig down. And majority of people aren't going to bother. So I think that a good way is to assume that people know nothing about you and they're completely new to the website, and then you're going to be able to cover all bases.
So if you've got a strange church name, and this isn't, by the way, this isn't a podcast episode about church names. That might be a different one, and there are arguments for and against. But if you've got an odd church name, you've got to explain that, haven't you?
Yeah, people need to know, and they might see it in the street and think, "What's that church about?" And they'll search online, and then they still don't know because you haven't told them, and that's a great opportunity to tell them.
So Joel Murray Memorial Baptist Church.
Yeah, JMM.
Yeah, needs a bit of explanation at the top.
It certainly would do, for many reasons.
For many reasons.
Yeah, for many reasons. I think one of the things that frustrates me about websites is where they're not device agnostic. I need to explain what that means. So often websites, especially older websites, were designed on widescreen computers or on computer screens, and they look great on the computer screen. But actually, most people don't access the internet just through a computer. They access it through a phone, right?
Most people don't use it through a computer.
They use a phone. Yeah,
that's right.
So actually, if you've got a website that looks great when let's just get imperial measurements for a moment. Let's say you've got a website which looks great when it's 12 inches across on your computer screen. If your phone just squeezes it in, so it's exactly the same content, you're not going to be able to read a thing. And that just drives me wild. Now, again, most modern website interfaces and providers will automatically make your website device agnostic. And so that's one of the things that really, really frustrates me.
I was just going to say that's a really important point. I think that all these interfaces you can pay for will have done that work for you, whereas you have to factor that in if you decide to build something from the ground up.
Where do you get good ideas from, guys? Where to, so I'm listening to this podcast, I'm thinking, we need to do a bit of work on our website, but perhaps encouraged to think it doesn't need a developer, it doesn't need a software engineer, it's something we can do ourselves. Where do I get good ideas from, for who might do it, A, and B, what it might look like?
I'd start by going to other churches' websites, because then you'll soon get an idea of what you think works and what you think doesn't work. And bluntly, you'll be able to look at some websites and think, I don't want to do it like that, but I think we could do it like this because it doesn't work particularly for you as a user. So I think that's a good place to start, and just start looking around what other churches are doing.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe it's kind of go a step kind of down the line a little bit to think about evaluating your websites. So using something like Google Analytics or something like along those lines to see.
But just tell us about that. Sounds technical. Google Analytics. What's that?
It is pretty technical, but again, most modern websites will have it. It's a it's a login on a Google website, and it will tell you the numbers of people who are visiting your website on whichever days, and it kind of splits them into different audiences and stuff. Tells you who's visiting what different pages at whatever time. So if you've got your website all set up, and then you can look on Google Analytics or something along those lines to see what people are looking at, and if there's some pages that no one's looking at, then there's either two reasons. One is because it's not interesting, or the other one is because no one can find it. So that's a really helpful way to try and think, okay, well, how is my website doing? How can I then improve it or make it more helpful to people?
Have you written an article about that as well?
Yeah, I wrote an article just recently about when you go into that kind of analytics, what do all the words mean? Impressions.
So if you
views,
went onto the FIEC website, search for Google Analytics,
it will definitely come up at number one. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Great. And it's worth saying, isn't it, that people do find churches via the FIEC website. So I think especially people who have belonged to the FIEC or know about the FIEC in another place, they move to a new area, they might go to the Find a Church facility on the FIEC website. Joel, what do they come to? If they go to the Find a Church section, which is at the top banner, you just click on it. What do they come to?
There's a little box. You can type in either a postcode or a city or a town. You can choose a radius, 5-10 miles, whatever you want it to be. Hit search, and it'll bring you up a little map, and it'll plot the FIEC affiliated churches on the map, and it'll give you a list of who they all are.
And also, when you get to that landing page, you'll see a map of the whole of Britain with every FIEC church on it, so you can sort of see where there's a huge population of FIEC churches.
So it's a church planting tool as well.
Well, is that you could say so, but you can scroll in on an area without doing a search, and also find churches plotted there like that as well.
Okay. And they should have the times of their services, as we mentioned before, their location at the very, very least. And some churches have added more information on there to be able to explain a little bit more.
So if you're a church leader listening, you can add information to the FIEC website on your church page, can't you? How would you do that, Joel?
When you go onto that church to find a church, it's a good idea to see what your church looks like if you're not quite sure. On the FIEC website, there's a little button at the top to say, does this belong to you? You can click on that, and you can either log in if you've already got login, or you can request the login details. Okay. And then you fill in all your details, you can upload a photo, and then it all just gets moved across and looks nice on the FIEC website.
So static information, though, because you don't want to be updating that every week as well. Absolutely. Updating everything.
Yeah, try not to put dates and like very specific stuff on. Explain who you are, top level, and there's a space where you can click visit website, and that's where the details that you want people to go on to.
Okay. Just one last thing to finish. How important is a good website address, Phil, would you say?
I think it needs to be easy to spell and put in. So I think well just to give an example, when we did one of our get to know films a few years ago, you can find those on the website as well. We went to New Life Church in Middlesbrough, and we spelt Middlesbrough wrong on the video because it's not got a second O in it, for example. So if you're asking people to spell long names of places that no, exactly.
Middlesbrough.
Or is it? Or either it does or it doesn't, and we did it wrong.
Edinburgh doesn't.
Okay,
it doesn't have any O's.
Yeah, no. Anyway, we spelt it wrong. Is the headline? We spelt it wrong. But I guess my point is, if you've got to put a place in Britain in the website name and the URL, and people spell it wrong, that could be problematic. So you need to make sure that it's straightforward from that perspective.
I'd like to mention 3 letters, SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization.
I wondered if we get to this.
Which still doesn't explain anything, but basically there's different websites will do better when you search something on Google. So you're right that as well as your website, people can find churches through the FIEC website, but there's other places as well, like Google, for example, has listings for all churches, whether you've set one up or not, they've got one there already. And when people search on their search bar, it will put websites in an order. And depending on how optimized they are, then that will depend on where you are at number 1, 2, 3, 4,
and what does that mean briefly, optimized?
Optimized is making some things specific for Google. So ways to do that would be to include the location. So for example, if someone is searching churches in Middlesbrough, if your website doesn't mention Middlesbrough, or if the URL doesn't have Middlesbrough in it, then you may not appear higher up. As high up as another website that does, because Google thinks, Middlesbrough, that's even in the website name, it must be important.
And also Google will correct your stupid spelling if you're me, so therefore that will also help you if you're searching via Google. So that would suggest that it's less important if you're Googling, because Google will do some of the work for you. But actually, if you're taking a website name off, say, a podcast feed like this, and you've got to then spell it right and that kind of thing, that's where it matters more, probably.
Yeah, independence with an E at the end.
Yeah, right.
So just a takeaway from each of you. I mean, we've started to get into technical stuff. It can seem a little overwhelming, but just come back full circle to where we started. It doesn't need to be overwhelming, doesn't it? It can be simple. It can be straightforward. It can be effective, can't it, Joel?
Yeah, I'd say, again, think about someone who's visiting your website. Put yourself in your shoes. It might even be worth sending your website to a family member or someone who's completely not connected with the church whatsoever. Say, please, could you just have a look at this? 5 minutes. Tell me if you found whether you found it good or engaging, that kind of stuff. And then that's the way to do it. And really, a website that performs well on Google performs well because it's useful to the person who's clicking on the link. So if you've thought it through in that sense and given people all the things they need, then not only will it be helpful and it'll be a good website, but also it will do well on Google search results too.
And Phil, you've been an elder in a local church. This isn't something for elders to worry about, right? It's just, let the young guy get on with it.
No, not necessarily. I think you need to have an eye over it because you want to make sure that it's saying the things that you want it to say about the church. I think sometimes as church leaders, we can be tempted to delegate things that we either have no interest in or that we don't think is as important down. And actually, so I think once it's set up and you've got to pass over it, absolutely it's a deacon's responsibility or somebody in the church's responsibility to maintain it. But you need to know what's on there and what it's saying. And you ought to have some oversight of that, I think, as a church leader, definitely.
Yeah. Great, guys. Thank you very much. It's been really helpful. I'm looking forward now to all the emails of people who look at the FIEC website and send us in their critique.
I'm sure there's much to critique.
In fairness, we're always looking at our website,
Absolutely.
aren't we, and thinking, how do we improve it? It's a bit trickier when you've got some of the content we've got on just how you rearrange it and stuff. But actually, asking that question, is it serving the purpose that it's there for? It's really important all the time. Yeah. Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Joel. Thanks for joining us. My name is Adrian. I've been Adrian. And this is Independence, the FIEC podcast.